When grocery prices in Toronto, Melbourne, and London hit record highs, the headline is always the same: a broken global supply chain and foreign geopolitical greed. But beneath the political noise of the nightly news lies a quieter, more calculated reality. What if the soaring cost of living isn't a failure of international trade, but a deliberate architecture designed to eliminate anyone who cannot afford to play by new rules? We are conditioned to look outward. We point our fingers at distant superpowers, international tariffs, and protectionist cross-border disputes as the sole architects of our economic strain. Yet, historical trade records and recent legislative data from Western middle powers suggest a startling contradiction. The greatest pressure on domestic manufacturing and consumer stability isn't coming from across the ocean. It is being written directly into domestic trade agreements under the guise of national security. Consider the architecture of agreements like the USMCA. Mainstream analysts frame these treaties as diplomatic victories for fair regional competition. But when economists audit the actual compliance mandates and stringent rules of origin thresholds, a very different pattern emerges. Small and medium enterprises across secondary markets find themselves systematically locked out, not by market failure, but by compliance costs that only multi-billion-dollar conglomerates can absorb. This is where the standard narrative breaks down entirely. Tariffs and trade barriers are publicly sold as protective shields for local workers against unfair foreign competition. But empirical evidence from industrial output data across Canada, the UK, and Australia reveals that protected sectors often see employment decline, while corporate profit margins expand. The shield is functioning less like a defense wall and more like a toll booth. When compliance becomes a weapon, independence quietly dies. Middle powers surrender their sovereign economic agility not through military conquest, but through a gradual accumulation of regulatory hurdles that make self-reliance financially impossible. And if the rules of global trade are being rewritten to concentrate control rather than distribute prosperity, then we must ask a fundamental question about who these borders are actually built to contain. If trade barriers are officially designed to protect local economies, why do the exact corporations lobbying for these tariffs continue to outsource their core production the moment the ink dries? To understand how trade barriers quietly reshape a nation, we must look past the press releases and examine historical compliance data from the Post-NAFTA era. When regulatory thresholds for regional content were raised, proponents promised an industrial renaissance for local manufacturers. Yet empirical trade audits from Canadian and Australian export boards show a very different trajectory. The compliance cost alone eliminated 40% of independent suppliers within 3 years. This was not an accidental market casualty. It was a structural filter. When governments impose rigid rules of origin and complex customs verification systems, small businesses lack the legal infrastructure to absorb the administrative burden. The evidence indicates that trade barriers do not protect domestic markets uniformly. They act as a selective gate, filtering out independent competition and leaving the market open exclusively to entities with deep legal reserves. Consider the quiet consolidation that followed the implementation of modern tariff frameworks in the UK and Australia. While retail prices climbed under the banner of national supply security, profit disclosures from major logistics conglomerates revealed record margins. The counter evidence is stark. Tariffs transferred wealth away from decentralized producers towards centralized corporate monopolies, while total domestic production volume remained completely stagnant. The mainstream narrative relies on the illusion of national self-sufficiency. Politicians stand before flashing cameras, claiming that tariffs insulate workers from global shocks. But economic research on tariff pass-through rates demonstrates that 90% of tariff costs are absorbed not by foreign exporters, but by domestic consumers and localized small-scale vendors. The shield built to protect the working class is funded directly out of their own pockets.
When the data is stripped of political rhetoric, a consistent pattern emerges across every Western middle power. Trade protectionism functions less as an economic defense mechanism and more as an internal zoning law for corporate empires. And if the data shows that tariffs destroy local independence rather than preserve it, we have to ask what kind of stability is actually being purchased at this price. If centralized monopolies benefit most from trade barriers that were supposedly built to defend local workers, then who actually holds the pen when trade policy is drafted?
To see how a trade barrier transforms into an internal control system, we must look inside the drafting rooms where multinationals meet legislators. The hidden mechanism is not found in public tariff schedules, but in proprietary compliance frameworks. When a trade agreement introduces complex tracing mandates, it creates a private toll system. Only massive conglomerates can afford the legal machinery required to prove origin compliance, effectively weaponizing the border against anyone smaller.
This mechanism operates through a quiet process economists call regulatory capture. When smaller domestic competitors are crushed under the weight of compliance paperwork, market share doesn't vanish, it concentrates. Legislative data shows that every major tariff implementation in the past decade has been preceded by heavy lobbying from industry cartels. They aren't lobbying to keep foreign goods out. They are lobbying to price independent rivals out of existence.
Consider how supply chains are systematically rerouted under these rules. Independent vendors who source materials regionally are strangled by multi-layered verification fees. Meanwhile, global monopolies with pre-existing vertically integrated supply chains absorb these administrative costs as a minor tax on total market domination. The trade barrier acts as an automated sorting machine, rewarding scale and punishing autonomy.
This is the hidden architecture of modern protectionism. It reframes corporate consolidation as national defense. By convincing the public that every tariff is a shield against foreign economic threats, monopolistic conglomerates secure legal immunity to absorb or eliminate domestic competition. The consumer pays twice. First, through inflated retail prices at the checkout counter, and second, through the permanent destruction of local economic independence.
Once you recognize this pattern, the entire landscape of Western trade policy changes. The friction isn't between nations, it's between decentralized independence and centralized corporate control. And if trade agreements are structurally engineered to eliminate middle-tier competitors, we have to examine what happens to a society when all economic power is locked behind a corporate paywall. If compliance costs and trade tariffs are intentionally designed to crush localized manufacturing, then what happens to national security when a country can no longer produce anything on its own soil?
When economic protectionism becomes an instrument for corporate consolidation, the consequences ripple far beyond balance sheets and supply chains. Look closely at how regional labor markets respond when independent producers are systematically priced out of existence. A town that once sustained itself through diverse, decentralized manufacturing suddenly becomes a company town, entirely dependent on the operational whim of a single logistics titan.
This centralization of economic survival alters the very fabric of middle power societies. When autonomy is replaced by administrative dependency, innovation
quietly withers. Small creators and independent workshops don't fail because their ideas lack merit. They starve because the compliance toll set by trade monopolies makes survival mathematically impossible. We are trading long-term resilience for short-term corporate control, disguised as stability.
Consider the geopolitical vulnerability this creates. Western middle powers pride themselves on sovereign resilience, yet by outsourcing domestic production capacity to a handful of monopolistic giants shielded by tariff walls, they hollow out their own foundational security. When a global crisis hits, a nation that has legislated away its independent manufacturers finds itself completely paralyzed, waiting for corporate boardrooms to authorize recovery.
The illusion of safety is perhaps the most effective product these trade frameworks sell. Citizens accept higher prices and restricted market choices under the comforting belief that the state is insulating them from external chaos. But historical audit trails show that protectionist barriers rarely defend the vulnerable. They insulate incumbents from accountability. The wall built to keep the world out ends up locking the population inside a managed market. When the architecture of trade is captured by private interests, national borders cease to be lines of sovereign defense and become toll gates for corporate extraction. The freedom to build, trade, and innovate locally is traded away for corporate predictability. And as the middle tier of every Western economy continues to shrink under this regulatory weight, we are forced to confront the true destination of our current economic path. If every major trade barrier inexorably funnels wealth upward while crushing the independent foundation of society, can we truly call this economic protection, or is it simply a corporate siege? We began with a simple observation: that the rising cost of living across Western middle powers is rarely a random accident of global markets. By tracing the mechanics of trade barriers, compliance costs, and regulatory capture, we find a consistent reality. The systems designed to protect the economy are instead being used to insulate conglomerates, crush independent competitors, and commodify sovereignty itself. When the public is taught to view economic struggle as a geopolitical inevitability, citizens surrender their leverage. We accept managed markets, inflated prices, and corporate dependency as the unavoidable price of stability. But history demonstrates that genuine resilience has never come from hiding behind administrative walls built by monopolies. It comes from decentralized production, transparent rules, and sovereign autonomy at the ground level. The transformation of international trade into a corporate tollgate is not an irreversible law of economics. It is a policy choice written by specific actors benefiting specific interests at the direct expense of everyone else. Recognizing this distinction strips away the illusion of inevitability. Once you see the trade barrier not as a shield for the nation, but as a fence for a corporate pen, the illusion loses its power. As the middle tier of our economies faces relentless pressure from standardized compliance and concentrated wealth, the path forward requires a fundamental shift in perspective. We must stop asking how to survive within a system engineered to restrict us. The true imperative is to examine what kind of economic autonomy we are willing to reclaim before the option is legislated away entirely. Borders were originally conceived to protect a society's collective independence from external dominance. Today, they risk becoming instruments that trap local populations inside a controlled corporate enclosure.
The ultimate danger of modern protectionism is not that it shuts out the world, but that it successfully locks us inside a system where our own economic survival requires permission from a corporate monopoly. If our economic survival now requires permission from corporate monopolies operating behind national borders, are we citizens of a sovereign nation, or are we simply tenants in a corporate state?